Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Business Podcast, our final one for season 2. In today's show, I'll be sharing some exciting updates for 2025 and looking back over the incredible guests we've had join us this season. So let's get started. Welcome to the Beautiful Business Podcast from the Wow Company. If you're searching for the right strategies, tools, and connections to ignite your thinking and elevate your business, then join us for a fortnightly dose of inspiration. Our guests range from industry-leading agencies and cutting-edge tech pioneers to motivational speakers and executives, all offering actionable insights to help you thrive in profit and purpose. So, whether you're a growing consultancy or an agency leader, this podcast is your source of knowledge and encouragement to spark meaningful change in your business and beyond. I need to start this episode with our first and most exciting point for 2025. I am thrilled to announce that from today and in season 3, I'll be joined by a co-host. Now, our excellent new host will bring a different dynamic to the podcast. His expertise and experience in business and in the agency world is just going to bring a fantastic, fresh perspective to all the episodes he covers. It is, in fact, our very own co-founder at Wow, Paul Bulpitt. If you don't know much about Paul, then I really urge you to head back to our last episode where the man himself was joined by Wow's other co-founder, Peter Chapp, to reminisce on their 20 years of business together. And it was such a fantastic episode where we not only learned about their success in business, but also got to know a little bit more about each of them. Let's take a little look.
So if you could go back to 2004, the point at which we set this up, what advice would you give yourself?
Don't do it. I think would probably be with the 20 years hindsight would probably be the advice that I would give that idiot that had that stupid idea at that point. But I think on a more serious point, I think actually it was some of that kind of delusional spirit that actually got us to start the business, that got us going, that got us our first clients and our first team members. And actually, I think when we've been at our best is when that fire's been burning. But I think 2004 me would be telling 2025 me to keep going, keep believing, keep that fire, and keep doing the stupid stuff.
Yeah, love it.
What advice would you give your 2004 self?
I'd probably just keep it simple. I'd probably just say, it'll all be all right. It'll all be all right. And just enjoy the journey. So trust it will be all right and just enjoy the journey. Because as you know, as anyone listening to this knows, being a business owner is quite a ride. And there's times when it's really, really tough. And I think just to remind myself, just to remind everyone listening to this, that it all works out in the end. It always does. And just enjoy that particular moment because it will soon be a distant memory. So I certainly have enjoyed large chunks of it. It would just be nice to have that advice on my shoulder at the particularly challenging moments. But yeah, I was right. It doesn't work out in the end.
Paul, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited for you to join.
Chloe, thanks for having me.
I have already referenced for people to go back and watch the episode with you and Pete where you gave us such a great discussion anyway. But you started that by telling us a little bit about yourself. And I think you gave us that fun fact that you speak Russian, right?
Yeah.
It feels only right that we talk about this a little bit as an intro to you on the podcast.
What can I tell you? I'm not a spy, by the way. I'm not a spy.
You're not. Well, thanks.
If I was, that's probably what I'd say as well, right?
Exactly. I was going to say, why do you speak Russian? How did this come about?
So I studied Russian as part of my degree course. I lived in Moscow for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Traveled through Russia.
Wow.
And
that would have been a little while ago. Do you still speak this now? I was really polite there. That would have been a couple of years ago.
A couple of decades ago, yes. Thank you for.
Do you still speak Russian? Are you still fluent?
I wouldn't say fluent, but I can still speak some. Я знаю немного по-русски язык.
What was that rude? What you just said?
It just means I know a little bit of Russian.
Oh, okay, excellent.
So two other phrases I can wheel out is are "Я по Красной площадь," which means I'm in Red Square.
Oh, okay.
And my favourite is "Осторожно, двери открываются," and that is what the PA says on the Moscow Underground when the doors are closing.
Oh, brilliant!
The doors are closing, which is like pretty useful phrase.
So you and Peter are the masterminds behind this whole beautiful business ethos that we have at the Wow Company. I'm just really intrigued. What inspired that? Where has it come from?
So this is actually a story I've never told anyone else.
An exclusive. Amazing.
And interestingly, there is actually a Russian link. So the Russian author Dostoevsky has this famous quote that says "Beauty will save the world," and what he means is people's belief in beauty will save the world. And you take that and you look around, and I know there'll be loads of people listening that have like a gratitude journal, and the idea of gratitude journaling is that the more you notice things that you're grateful for, the more you are grateful, and lifts your mood, your mindset, your outlook. The same happens with beauty. Is the idea that the more you notice beauty, the more you see, the more you live in beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the core of it. And from beauty, lots of things come. And the Russian thing about beauty is that beauty is on the inside. Mm-hmm. Beauty comes from the inside more so than the outside. So, as you quite rightly said, my time studying Russian was a very long time ago. So this is a deep seated thing. But then fast forward a few years to we've been running WoW for like 5 or 6 years, and what we noticed was there were like fundamentally types of people that we just loved working with, and we looked in reasonable depth about like what are the commonalities, what are the people that we're drawn to, that you would types of business owners, business leaders we're working with, that you would expend that discretionary effort for, that you go the extra mile for. And it was people that shared some of the beliefs we held. And in, I think it was 2014, first kind of like brought these ideas together in the Beautiful Business Manifesto. And the idea is that it was about people that were leading purpose-driven businesses or businesses with soul. It was people-centered businesses. We hated working for people that spoke negatively or meanly or moaned or complained about their team or their staff. We love people-centered businesses. We love working with people who had consciously designed their business to operate in a certain way, and that's really where it came from. We codified it in the Beautiful Business Manifesto now over 10 years ago, and it helped us go on a bit of a mission, I guess. It gave us the clarity of the types of people we would work best with, but also the types of people we could look for that we most wanted to help. And I suppose my personal mission, if you like, is to find more people and develop the support and the tools and the knowledge, the frameworks that can really help people build and develop beautiful businesses. And here we are on the Beautiful Business Podcast.
It comes back to what you said as well, about the beauty being on the inside, and actually that translates so well into business, doesn't it? That the beauty comes from when you actually look after the people, and that kind of core and the heart of it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes for us it's about taking a long-term view. You know the quote about planting trees you never feel the shade from. You know, we've always, since I'm pretty sure that Peter and I would have talked about this thing about just taking like a long-term view. We've always been against cutting corners or doing things for show, and I just don't think it's sustainable in the long term. I do fundamentally think that those principles that underpin what we call beautiful business is there for businesses that fundamentally do good in the world, do good in their communities and societies, but also businesses that will sustain over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
Hopefully the fact that we've been around for 20 years, a business that I probably started in my teens.
And how amazing that we've now got a podcast called The Beautiful Business Podcast. What are you most looking forward to about podcasting, Paul?
I think for me, it's the conversations. I think I know we're going to get into a bit more detail about some of the episodes, some of the highlights from this year, but you look at some of the people we're having conversations with, I think some of the ideas, most of all, that like the practical tips that we're surfacing. Running a business is hard. Leading a business is hard, right? And then to be able to have those conversations with some of the people we've had conversations with this season and surface that up to such a broad and growing audience of people leading, running businesses, just like in itself feels massively soulful. And I guess selfishly, we've got a load of really exciting episodes booked in for next year. And there's some really cool people that I'm going to get to have a talk. My favorite thing to talk about business. I just get to talk to really interesting people, a broad, diverse range of people about business. And I can't wait.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it's going to be great. Go on. What's your comeback question?
You've been doing the Beautiful Business podcast throughout this year. What do you think you've gained most personally from podcasting?
I don't know whether it's, well, actually, I do know the answer to that. What I've gained personally is just so much knowledge that I didn't have beforehand. And I think there's something about speaking to people who are like literally living this stuff and then giving this advice. I don't think there's a better way for someone who's fairly fresh into this world to learn. But the thing that I've really enjoyed doing along the way is, and hopefully I've been able to kind of provide, is the devil's advocate voice a little bit. Because I think sometimes the advice that's given is incredible, but sometimes it's really hard to actually put into practice, isn't it? And I've enjoyed having those moments to be able to say, yeah, but like how does that
How
work?
do you actually do that?
Yeah, you know, one that springs to mind, for example, is when we talk about things like value-based pricing. You know, it's something that I think is clearly a great way of working, a great method to put in place. But then when you pair that with how difficult the market is and how scary it's been over the last couple of years and what a roller coaster it really has been, you know, it's interesting to then say, yeah, that is a great idea, but is now the right time? Or how do we do this in the right way so that it doesn't affect things and make things worse than what they might already be? Does that make sense? You know?
Yeah, 100%. And I've obviously listened to a load of your conversations on the podcast, and I think that bit really comes out. But I think it's then that you're really extracting the goodness. Those are the gems, because people come on the podcast to talk about, and they share their ideas or things that to them might seem really simple.
And because they're experts, right? So of course it's simple to them. But I that's what I've enjoyed, is trying to play that devil's advocate and go, okay, but how does that actually work? Does it actually work? How does it actually work? You know?
Yeah.
That's been fun. Do you have a top moment or some top moments from 2024 that you'd like to talk about?
I think it's really hard to pick one, because I think through the conversations you've had on the podcast this year, the breadth, different people have been really good in different areas, right? I think the probably my favorite quite a recent one is Lucy Adams, like long-time friend of WOW. And you know, when I hear Lucy talk, it's almost the feeling that I think people have going to church, because I just go and listen, and then I'm like re-energized, and then I go back into the world, and I'm like, okay, yes, I'm energized, I'm motivated, I have clarity, I know what I need to do. And I'm going to be really embarrassed if Lucy listens to this episode, because she'll hear me talking about, but I do talk about Lucy as like the gospel according to Lucy almost. And I think that episode was a really good example of taking. So Lucy Adams, if you're not listening to the episode, go and listen to the episode. Lucy's got a really broad, extensive HR career. Was HR director at the BBC, other big organisations. She's done keynotes all around the world in front of massive audiences. The reason that I think I love Lucy is she believes what we believe, but she's doing that at massive scale. Kind of like proving that a load of these principles around people-centered businesses work at scale. But I guess for me as a business owner, what she does for me is gives me, and you brought this out beautifully, I thought, through that episode, was loads of just ram-packed with practical bits of advice on, I think there's one bit you were talking to her about performance management. And she said, well, fundamentally, people need to take charge of their own performance, their own progression. What are we? Are we 12? I just love that kind of energy and passion and steepness that kind of like gives me the resolve to be, I don't know, probably the leader that I need to be, that bravery, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. I think she's clearly on a mission that needs to happen, right? I think, this whole perspective of HR, and not to, give a bit of a pun considering that they are disruptive HR, it needs to be disrupted, doesn't it? We need to find new ways of looking at things. I know there was a moment for me when we talked about opening a can of worms, really, because 2024 is so much about kind of wellness and well-being within the workplace, which there's absolutely 100% a place for, but also that fear of opening that can of worms when you're a manager or a leader. And she just has such a great way of simplifying it and making it seem logical, of course.
And doable and practical. It's not theoretical. It's not a bit like you're saying before, it's not kind of like a concept that we all know. It's actually, well, this is how it works in practice. This is how you're going to go away and do it.
Yeah. Shall we take a little look at a clip from Lucy's episode?
Oh, yes, please. Let's.
You're a manager today with all of the focus on well-being, diversity and inclusion. What can I say? What can't I say? Employment legislation. You've got people like me in HR frightening the life out of the manager. Don't get us into a tribunal. I think it is absolutely terrifying. What I would say to managers is that no one expects you to be perfect, but wherever possible, ask good questions. So instead of getting into your default style and maybe giving out tasks or instructions or telling, and I'm guilty of this, that's my default style, is to, right, let's get on, very action oriented, telling people, speaking more than I listen, pausing and just asking a question, and asking an open question that can tie into maybe how do they want to be communicated with? What's the best, when are you at your best? Is it, mornings, afternoons? Do you prefer me to write an email? You're not always going to get it right, but it will be appreciated that you have asked the question. What we're seeing is the rise of these little personal user manuals, as they're called. So and I think this is a real missed opportunity, onboarding is where people join you, you've got a real opportunity to find out what is unique, special and different about them. So asking the question, tell us about the best reward you ever had at work, or if you were managing you, what would that look like? Those kind of little questions that you can ask. And again, you're not going to get it right all the time, but asking the questions at least will give you more insight into who the people are in your team, what makes them tick. Equally, what I would say is that they are grown-ups, they are adults, and it's not about you having to look after them. And I think sometimes as a leader, we want to take care of our people. We go into that parental mode. One of the best bit of leadership I experienced around the well-being agenda was when I was working for a company called Serco, and I was going through some rough personal stuff at the time. And my line manager, the kind of MD of the division, said, "Oh, can I have a word, Lucy?" And he said, "Look, I know you're going through some difficult stuff at the moment." He said, "But I'm not going to patronize you. I'm not going to take work off you. I'm not going to keep asking if you're okay. I'm not going to tell you to take time off. He said, however, but you're a grown up. I expect you to let me know if you need anything. But what you need to know, Lucy, is whatever you need, you've got it. And it was the best. I mean, I still remember it now, and it's like 20 years ago. It was so empowering. It was caring. I knew that he got my back. I knew that he would respond to my needs if I would, but I needed to ask. And it's not the manager's responsibility. They're not, telepathic. They can't possibly know what's going on in your home life, and you might not want to share that with them. But I think too often we kind of assume that the manager has to take care of all this stuff. And actually, I think what the manager can do is to have those kind of conversations with their people. You're grown-ups. If you have anything that you need to raise with me, I've got your back. I'm here to listen if you need me, and meet the, and obviously follow through on that. But you don't have to be the one that is the mental health support.
Yeah, Lucy touched on it there about the intricacies, like I mentioned, of leadership and well-being, and that actually reminds me of another episode this year, which has really stuck with me. I mean, I've found it really a struggle to kind of think back and pick out individual ones, just like you, because there's been such great guests on. But the episode with Katy Howell from Immediate Future, where Katy talked about her journey with burnout as an agency leader, the whole episode stuck with me, and I thought that she was amazing with her kind of story and how she pulled through it. But the one thing that really stood out was when she talked about the importance of the community. So, of course, she had the support of her family and friends, but it was the importance of the community in the agency world specifically that really helped her to get through what she went through.
We've known Katy at WOW for a long time, and to hear that story was tough. It was also, I thought, really important to have that conversation, because I think when you're in that moment, you feel alone, and for other people to be able to hear Katy's frankness and honesty, how she talked of her experience, in some ways is, for some people, can be reassuring. Like, I think, like you said, it's been a tough year for lots of people, and actually knowing that you're not alone, which kind of comes back to the point of community. I think certainly for me as a business owner, you do have friends and family around you, but there's something fundamentally different about running a business. I think sometimes, rightly or wrongly, I don't know if people think because you run a business that you must travel by private jet, and the only reason you don't drive a Ferrari is because it's hidden in the garage or something. But there's something about speaking to other business owners, other people with shared experience, which I think is Katy's point about community, that is really together. And I guess also there's more that fellow agency owners can do to help you, or like whatever industry you're in, there's other people within the industry or other business owners that can help you. Yeah.
There's some validation, isn't there, when people just get it without you having to go into the details. They just get it. And, we talked a little bit about how important mental health is. And I think Katy's episode just highlighted that it can't just be a tick box thing. We can't just be talking about it at surface level. From her experience and the way it's changed her life to move forward, it just highlighted how important it truly is to really care about your own mental health, not, also your team's mental health, but also about your own mental health.
Fix your own oxygen mask first, really. And I think that's if for anyone listening to this that knows Katy or similar, has a similar personality type, what you do in that situation is you just make sure that everyone else is okay and forego your own well-being and your own needs. You go through a tough time in business and you're worried about your customers and your clients and making sure people are being paid in your team and everyone else before you look at yourself, and all of the good things that you should be doing, like sleep and exercise and diet, are pretty much the first things to go out the window. I think that's like really good takeaway.
I think people sometimes roll their eyes a little bit when we talk about, eat well, sleep well, get out of the house every day. But you have to take it back to basics, don't you? You can't run before you walk. And actually, I think taking those small steps really do add up to a better all-round mental health.
Should we listen to a clip from Katy's episode, Chloe?
Yes, let's.
Actually, the biggest support I got were from my industry pals, other founders, where we were open with each other. And I'm lucky enough to have great relationships with people like Tamara from Social Element and folk who have been down some of these roads. Is your community, if you can be open, the community is actually much more supportive, which is quite hard. I tried for a long time to do this. I belong to a number of clubs, but they all turned into, dare I say it, a bit of a willy-waving exercise of telling everybody how great they were. And I felt like I was possibly the only person who didn't feel that my life was great. But since COVID, I think people have got a little bit better at being a bit more open. And there are some communities, such as the WOW community, where we even have a space where you can say when you're feeling a bit crap. And I love that people use it. It's just fabulous because we all, as you rightly say, look at that, 60% of people are having challenges with their business, whatever that might be, or, they're worrying about things and working around the clock. And knowing that, for instance, that sales picked up last month, but this month, oh my gosh, we hit the 1st of August and it's all gone quiet and you can't get a hold of anybody, is knowing that everybody else is in the same boat helps.
Yeah.
It doesn't fix the problem, but it helps. It makes you feel like you're not alone. And I think we need there are no quick fixes to this and there are no easy solutions, but I think our community is where the answers really lie.
Yeah.
Our colleagues, peers. And the other element to that is I am now completely open and frank with my team. And if they don't like having that kind of a boss, well, so be it. But I'll tell them when I'm stressed out. I'll tell them when I'm not feeling myself.
I think it was such an interesting conversation with Katy overall. And one of the things that she talked about was the desire and the need actually to please the people around her, whether it be her team or, her clients. Like, she just had this inherent need to please those people. And I know from having a sneaky look behind the scenes that you have already recorded an episode for the 2025 season with an incredible psychologist who, well, actually, rather than me try and guess what she talks about, can you give us a bit of the lowdown on it?
Yeah, okay. So we've recorded an episode with the psychologist Jess Baker, who's co-authored a book called Super Helper Syndrome, a survival guide for compassionate people. And like Jess herself was just brilliant to have on the podcast. She's got a fascinating background that we talk about. And what she talks about is this super helper syndrome phenomenon that she noticed of people who give of themselves. They subjugate their own needs for the sake of others. And sometimes, like, you look around and we'll see lots of people like this, that actually something Jess talks about is something called the helper's high. Some of us get a buzz from helping people and we do that. But I think where you see it fall down is that where people just get in a complete pickle, really, because they're helping others to the detriment of themselves. And there's some extreme examples that we talk about where there's people that are their helpfulness is actually unhelpful. There's a funny story of this off-duty nurse coming out of the gym, and she sees someone who she thinks is struggling to get out of the car, so she gets them out of the car, and she obviously expects thanks. She's just wired to help people. This poor nurse is absolutely shattered and burnt out herself. And imagine her dismay when she finds that the person that she thinks she's helped get out of the car was actually trying to get in the car. There's loads that we go into with Jess, and she's just got a lovely way of telling the story. And we talk about the ideas, the symptoms that underpin, the 4 symptoms that underpin super helper syndrome, and also, most importantly, some practical things that A, you can do yourself if this is you, or B, we talk about what you can do if you have friends or colleagues that you think might be suffering from super helper syndrome.
Yeah, do you know what? I can't wait to listen to that, because just in the world of coaching, I find that so many people naturally fall into a state of wanting to please the people around them. And I don't think it's something that, I mean, I could be wrong. I need to listen to the episode, but I don't think it's something that people choose to do. I feel like it's a need. It's I have to do this sometimes, almost as strong in their personality as standard, other traits. But
and what we talked about with Jess was how this can come from, quite often come from childhood, where you've been brought up either in a family where everyone helps and that's what you do, or if you don't help enough, you're chastised for not helping enough. So a lot of this stuff's really deep seated. So I'd encourage anyone to get a copy of the book, but also look out for the podcast. I found it incredibly interesting. And just talking to Jess myself, I took something like 4 pages of notes, as well as having already read the book.
Shall we do a little sneak peek?
Are we allowed to?
I mean, it's we can do it, right? Surely.
No way. Okay, let's go.
We will never define a super helper because there are so many types. It could be the fixer in the family, it could be the go-to person, it could be the mediator, peacekeeper, it could be the doer, the rescuer. There are so many different ways in which we can help. But I think in the workplace, it's always tipping into where there are signs of they're not looking after themselves, or they're not behaving in a way that is conducive to them or their career or their personal growth. So, for example, you might be going above and beyond to support your colleagues. You might be the first to volunteer for responsibilities. You might see yourself as an indispensable team member, of course. But when you struggle to say no, you will find yourself overworking. You might be taken for granted. This builds the resentment. You might not ever say anything, but you're hoping that people might spot the fact that you might be a bit grumpy. But if you carry on that particular path of taking on more and more and more, ultimately because we're trying to prove our self-worth, because we're trying to, we're fulfilling our self-fulfilling prophecy of I am a good person, I am a helpful person, then what can tend to happen is that they're taking on more, but they aren't really doing so in a focused way. They're not doing so in a way that thinks like, okay, well, how can I improve my career opportunities? Or how can I help the right people? Okay, well, I'm spending all this time helping my colleagues, but they don't really need me to finish their PowerPoint for them. I could be doing something more impactful in my own way based on my own strengths. So I often ask people to kind of realign their thinking when it comes to what they're contributing and why, and try to make conscious choices about that.
So we were joined by some huge business names this year, and honestly, one that I had to try really hard not to fangirl out on was Blair Enns. The fact that we had Blair Enns on the podcast was just so incredible for me, and I really had to be careful with the questions because I felt like I could have just asked question after question after question after question. But it was so exciting to talk to Blair about his book that has come out and, is all about bringing the expert self to a sales conversation. One thing that really I just loved and recognized was when Blair talked about the flip. So he mentioned that when you're sat across from somebody and you're having a sales conversation and there's just a slight shift in energy, a slight change in movement, or a slight, a bit of eye contact or something, and you think, there you go. We're now all on the same page. They are now, really understanding where I'm coming from, and they can see the value that I can bring. And I don't know about you, Paul, but for me, I was like, yeah, I recognize that moment. And it's so exciting, isn't it, to have that moment of, we could be a great partnership with you. We could have a great working relationship.
Yeah, and I guess what you've identified there is some of like the practical things. So there's a load of the concepts that Blair talks about, like you said before, that are the concept of value pricing we all get and we all understand. But actually what you got to was actually some of the practical things that anyone listening can relate to and take away and go and do something with, which I think is extremely valuable itself.
Yeah. And I think another really important point that he touched on was how we can almost forget sometimes to bring the expert self to the selling conversation, because you go into a different mode, right? Go into I need to display, I need to show you how good I am. And that puts you into just another vendor. Whereas actually bringing your expert self and almost modeling how you would work and the expertise that you've got. And it's so logical when he talks about it, isn't it? But actually, I can totally understand how when you're sat down in a pitch for business, that the selling self comes out instead of the expert self, just because of, I don't know, nerves, of desire. He talked as well about how you have to not want them more than they want you because of that desperation, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think it comes from that desperation, that when you're in front of that pitch, you've done so much work, you've done so much prep, know on the last slide there's probably like a number, quite a big number, and that you could really, really do with it, make a difference to your year, your month, your year, whatever, if they say yes. So do you think that energy comes from kind of like what I think you said, desire or desperation?
Yeah. Well, 100%, right? Surely there will be, sometimes I imagine it could even be just such an attractive brand that you'd love to have on your portfolio, right? Or like you say, just the amount of work that you've put in, it's like, I can't fail at the last hurdle, surely. So yeah, I think 100% there's that energy there. And it was food for thought to have to think about reining that in and almost playing, I don't know, finding that middle ground of like, I'm going to play it cool a little bit here and not seem too eager. Must be really hard.
I don't know if anyone that knows me, like playing it cool isn't really my. I'm not very good at.
That's absolute lies. You're the coolest person I know.
Not very good at playing it cool. But I think the bit that I really could get on with is the idea of kind of showing your prospective customer, your prospective client, what it's going to be like working with you. Give them like a little taste of this is how it's going to be. And I think as a sales tactic, as much as anything, that's a really strong thing. And actually, fundamentally, most people going into those situations are experts on some level. At least a chunk more than the person sat the other side of the desk. So it's having that confidence to be the expert in that situation.
Yeah, definitely. I think we actually have a little clip here of Blair talking about that moment and the flip and where it would come ideally versus where else it might come in the conversation. So let's have a little look.
Well, ideally, the flip happens in the probative conversation, so it happens without you present. It happens before there's a direct person-to-person interaction. It's either they're reading your content or listening to your podcast or watching your YouTube videos, or they've read your book or your blog post, or one of your clients they're just sick of listening to one of your best clients go on effusively about how great you are. And so that shift happens before you interact with them. And you're talking about the part of the book where I make the point that, hey, we all know what the flip looks like because we've seen it happen in front of our very eyes. So we walk into a sale, a new business meeting, and the client's body language is closed. Their note-taking device is closed. If there's more than one of them, they might even be ignoring you. There are these little power play dynamics that signal to you, we are the prize to be won. You'll be lucky if you get to win us. And so these are the power dynamics of you're seen as a vendor. You're seen as easily replaceable. After this meeting, there's 3 others just like you that we're going to meet with. You're not that different. And then the meeting begins, and at some point you say something brilliant. It might be an insightful observation or a smart question. And something happens in the conversation to change the power dynamics, to cause the power dynamics to just flip. And that's why we call it the flip. And we all recognize it, as you pointed out. It's like there's a look in their eyes. There's the way they look at each other. There's the way their body language opens up. They open up their note-taking devices. They start to lean forward instead of leaning back. They're looking at you differently. They're asking more questions rather than making more statements. They're writing down your answers. If you've been in business long enough, you have experienced that moment. You think, oh yeah, okay, this is, and if you're wired like I am with a high need for authority and respect, you would think, okay, now everything is right in the world. This is the way it should be. That's you in the power position. That's you being seen as the expert. Your expertise is recognized and valued. These are the dynamics that you want to preserve in the engagement in itself. Therefore, you need to preserve these dynamics through the rest of the sale. And again, if the flip has not already happened and the inbound inquiry does not come to you with that kind of reverence or recognition of your expertise, then you're looking for the flip to happen in the subsequent conversations, in addition to the other objective that you're trying to accomplish.
That was definitely one of my fangirl moments. Speaking with Blair, like I said. Paul, did you have any fanboy moments from listening to last season?
Oh, good question. So I definitely did. Probably the biggest one for me was when you had Amy Sandler from Radical Candor on the podcast. So I read the Radical Candor book, Kim Scott's book, years ago. As you know, Chloe, we've talked about it lots at WOW. We've run training on it. We regularly talk about the Radical Candor matrix, the 2x2 matrix. And for me at that moment to have like Amy Sandler from Radical Candor on our podcast was absolutely incredible. And the people, I don't know, this is me fanboy now, but the people she knows, the people she's seen, the people she's worked with, the organizations that use Radical Candor, and they were on the Beautiful Business podcast, because fundamentally they believe a lot of what we believe. I think there was a great moment, I don't know if you remember back, where Amy was talking about like our kind of like this natural aversion to like giving feedback or wanting to have those difficult conversations, which is what Radical Candor is all about. And fundamentally, you know, if you really care about someone, you will put yourself in that uncomfortable position to have that conversation. But the thing that like really rang true with me was she said, well, loads of us have been brought up with this mantra of, if you haven't got anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And I thought, well, that is exactly how I was brought up. The number of times that I repeat that to myself, to my children. And I think you, in that quote, Chloe, you referenced you attributed the quote to someone. Do you remember who that was?
It was Bambi. It was Thumper and Bambi. Shout out Disney.
All right.
I mean, but the point is though, is that that's how young we learn it, isn't it? That's where I remember it from. I must have been a babe in arms watching that. But yeah, that's how young we start getting taught. If you don't got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all.
So two things there. I think number one, we obviously share the same cultural references, because
obviously,
it was Thumper, of course, it was Thumper. But I thought it was just a really nice way to think about this nice versus kind thing. Fundamentally, like many people want to be liked, having that uncomfortable conversation. In the podcast, Amy talked about she'd seen a guy come out of the bathroom basically with his flies down, and thought, oh, what am I going to say? That moment we all have, not when you see, I've seen loads of guys walk out of the bathroom with their flies down, but that uncomfortable moment where you really should give you've seen something and you should have that conversation, that uncomfortable conversation, and kind of just talk through like how, even for her, how hard she found it in that moment, just to have a quiet conversation with the guy. It would have been an awful lot easier, much less uncomfortable not to have had that conversation, but she did the kind thing, which was to have that difficult conversation. So my fanboy moment was 100% Amy Sander, Radical Candor, and I loved the conversation.
Yeah, that was an eye-opening episode for me as well, because I think she even put me through my paces on that episode when she asked me which quadrant I would sit in, and I realised that actually sometimes obnoxious aggression was my go-to, and that
was your thing.
Like I say, that's a session right there, isn't it, for to realise that oops.
It was funny the amount of questioning in that episode she did of you.
Yeah.
Shall we listen to a clip?
Yes, let's do that. As a manager, like you said, sometimes you have to give criticism. You have to share that in order to help somebody. And I think of like our spheres of control, and I can control how I say something and the intention behind it and the way it's said. I can't control how it lands. So how would someone be able to kind of navigate that when what they're saying comes from a really good place and they know it comes from that really good place, but it hasn't landed well?
This is such a beautiful question. I mean, this is really at the heart of the practice. This is why Radical Candor requires a lot of other skills. It requires self-awareness. It requires emotional management. It requires relational awareness. It's one-on-one conversations. It's one-on-one real-time conversations where if we're not doing it in person, we're doing it through video, or we know each other well enough on a phone call that we've agreed on that we can, pick up all of those sort of the nonverbals, the body language, etc. Knowing how can we know how what we're saying is landing. This is why we are not sending criticism through Slack. We are not breaking up with people by text, right? If we are someone, for me, like I'm someone who I can clarify my thinking by writing it. So I would write, context, observation, result, next steps. Very helpful to go into a conversation and have that written down so that I know what I want to say. But all of a sudden, here I am right now, Chloe, I'm in a conversation with you, and what I'm saying isn't landing well. And so part of it is I want to get really curious. Why is what I'm saying not landing well? And what we'll actually do in a workshop is we'll have people practice with like real feedback situations so that they can kind of role play how that might land. So even understanding, okay, public praise isn't comfortable for you. So, what's a better way that I could have done it? Now, I think, we will say in the model that there's a value of public praise because it helps people sort of know what good looks like. But sometimes public praise can really go awry. If it's like, oh, Chloe, or Amy, great job on the website. And meanwhile, like I've got my team who actually worked on the website, and now my team thinks I'm just claiming all the glory, or, so there can be these reasons why things fall flat when it comes to this idea of impact and intention. So what is my intention when I'm going into the conversation? Can be very helpful practice for us to have.
Do you know, Paul, I always lean towards the kind of people-centric HR, Radical Candor, like all of those ones feel like a really comfortable ground for me to sit in when I'm on the podcast. But another standout episode for me this year that was out of my comfort zone was speaking with Dines at Studio Blup.
Yeah.
His journey and the truth and nitty-grittiness that came from that episode with Dines, honestly, I was just buzzing at the end of it. It was such a roller coaster ride, but also really refreshing to hear.
Again, I wanted to create these amazing ideas, but then we're then saying we haven't got resources to do it, and then I'm then shifted back into just doing coming to meetings I didn't want to be in. So I found it really frustrating, and so did he, because when I lose motivation, I just kind of lose it, and I'm just like, okay, I'm like, yeah, whatever, and that's not who I am. This is not who I developed to be, I lost the hunger, I lost the drive. So then we sat down one day and I said, like, what do we want to do? Like, I said, we're breaking our necks at breakneck speed. No one's happy, and you're quite clearly stressed, bro. Like you're so stressed because you got people tapping you on the shoulder more than me, because they separated me from it. And they want to cloud my mind of this, but he was in it every day, and I see it in his face. He's broken. And I said, what do we want? And he went, I had to just remind us both what the vision and the goal was. We sat down, we both like nearly cried. It was like, you know what? Let's do this. Like, you know what? This is the vision of what we want is not this. And there's either one way out of this. We either change the way what we're doing, or we get out of the group. What is it going to be? And it was a big decision there and then, where it was just like, let's start pushing, let's start putting the things in place to kind of get our exit out, basically.
There was a moment in the episode with you and Peter where I think you asked each other, what advice would you give your 2004 self? And Peter said that he would say, like, don't worry, it's going to be okay. And not to put words in Dines' mouth here, but I imagine that that's something that he could probably really resonate with after going through that massive roller coaster. I just thought that episode was great fun.
Yeah, and I think obviously from like mine and Pete's perspective, I don't know to what degree any listeners could tell like the emotion in Pete's voice. Like I think sometimes as a like business owner, you're creating something brand new, something that didn't exist before. There's no in reality, there's no pathway, there's no promise that it will be okay. Yeah. And certainly in the early days or through turbulent times, you like the level of sort of like anxiety, uncertainty is like, however, and anyone listening to this that knows and loves Peter even half as much as I do will know that he's a tough cookie. So to hear the level of emotion in his voice tells you, I think, how hard it can be sometimes. And I think that's the beauty of these conversations with Dines or with Pete or with whoever is, I think you've done such a good job this year, Chloe, of having like really honest conversations, really getting to the heart of the people you're talking to.
Yeah, thank you. But I think honestly, it comes from them. The fact that Dines was so open about it, like I say, just gave a truth to something that I don't think we get to hear a lot of. And another thing that really stood out to me in that episode was when he talked about legacy and the importance of legacy to him, and how actually that kind of really was what came out of it in the end, was that he wanted a legacy more than he wanted the money from exiting. And I reckon that's something that a lot of business owners would be able to relate to, right?
I think some of that probably comes with like age as well. So we started WOW when we were in our 20s, and at that moment in time where you think you're going to live forever and you're going to do everything and nothing's going to get in your way, and like as you go through life, you realize that something's more important possibly. And I think that legacy bit, there's also comes a point where I think you built something and you don't just want that thing that you built and toiled and put so much of yourself into just to get swallowed up into like an acquisition or get ruined by someone who doesn't share your values. And I think the legacy bit's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And that feels like a really nice point to think about your chat with Peter, actually. It was such an amazing episode to listen to. I guess, how did it feel being on the other side of the mic?
I'm much more comfortable asking the questions, I have to say. And if it was, and conversely, Pete really likes talking. So if we ever do it again, I think it would just be me asking Pete questions. and that'd be great. But I think the bit that was like that possibly felt a bit self-indulgent for us is that's a conversation that we've not really ever had, and there'll be a lot of people who listen to that have worked with me or Pete or Wow, worked for us possibly, who haven't heard some of those bits. I think it's like felt a very warm conversation that I think you can tell like the warmth between the pair of us, which is quite incredible 20 years on to have that like warmth and care and respect for each other, but also like a pretty open conversation about some of the stuff we've been through, what we wanted to achieve, what our dreams were, but also like how a lot of those dreams stayed the same, and like fundamentally we're not done. And however bonkers it might sound, and I think this maybe falls into the legacy bit, and it might sound a bit bonkers to have run a business for 20 years and we still don't feel like we've cracked it. And actually I feel like there's so much more to come with Wow than has already been, that to some extent we're still at the beginning.
Yeah, that's exciting though, isn't it? That
Yeah, I think so. Maybe it's just a story I tell myself to keep myself going, but that's the kind of like the excitement and the passion that fires me to keep going, because there's so much more to be done, so much more that we can do, and we're in this beautiful position of having now doing it with 20 years experience and some phenomenal people around us that we work with.
Yeah. Do you know what I find fascinating when I listen to you talk about that episode though, Paul, is that I just get the impression that you don't comprehend how much value will come from that for people listening, because I think having, kind of listened to you and Peter talk about that journey, and although for you it feels like a warm, reminiscent time of the last 20 years of business, actually there's so much that you guys have been through that I think other people will either be able to relate to or will want to consider in the future. So hearing old timers like yourselves talk about as many old jokes in there as possible, but hearing old timers like yourselves talk about the importance of the people and how important it is to niche down and when you wish you'd done it, and just those little snippets of information I think are so valuable, and I love that you don't seem to comprehend the value that will come.
Okay, well that's nice to hear. I think my main piece of advice was to anyone listening was don't do it.
Cut. That was true. It was. Excellent. So we've got some incredible guests lined up for 2025. And obviously we don't want to give too much away. We want to leave some anticipation for the listeners. So, top line, tell me, what are you most looking forward to?
When we're doing this kind of like recap at the end of 2025, 100% this guest is going to be my fanboy moment of next year. So I'm really specifically very excited to talk to this person.
Okay.
On a level that's mind-blowing, but I think it's the conversations, and you go back over every episode of 2024 and there's just so much goodness. So I listen to them as a fan. I listen to them as a listener and take notes and take stuff from them, and to think that we're only going to do more of that next year, with the podcast keeps growing, the audience keeps growing. It's just incredibly exciting to be involved with and build on some of the great work that you've done this year, Chloe.
Yeah, I'm incredibly excited to do it as well, and to just keep trying to extract as much practical advice as possible from everyone. But also I'm most excited that we get to do it together. To have a co-host is going to be incredible. I think it's going to bring such a fun dynamic, and I'm really excited to hear the conversations that you have with people as well. I think it's going to be, really, really interesting and really fun.
No, thanks for having me on board. So I suppose like a question for you is I've got two questions for you, if I may.
Ooh, okay.
One is what advice do you have for me going into our 2025 season?
Don't do it.
Okay.
No, seriously. No, I'm joking. Do you know, I mean, this is really personal advice for you because obviously having worked with you, I know you. And I think that one of the greatest qualities that you have is how well you listen to people, which is a rare quality nowadays, isn't it? But I think that it's just such a great quality to have. So I think your listening and curiosity is just what, it's not really advice. It's just, I think that's what I'd remind you to tap into for it, because basically I think if you're curious about it and you hear it, then that's exactly what the listeners are going to hear and want to know as well. So just bring your standard self and your standard curiosity.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for showing that. And so second, I don't know if you've got time for a second question, but
go on.
Second question was, imagine I'm a business leader, business owner, listening to this podcast for the first time. What advice would you give me to get the most out of the podcast in 2025?
I think we've got such a diverse range of people that I would recommend anyone to find the subjects that they're most passionate about, because guaranteed we'll have covered it at some point. And if we haven't, then we need to, so let us know. But guaranteed we'll have covered it. And we've like I say, covered so much that I would pick those ones first and listen to those people. And similarly to what you said, lots of people I speak to who have listened to the podcast, they do write notes, they do take away things, and rather than just sort of listening to a podcast in the background and letting it kind of fizzle out in your brain and thinking, oh, maybe I'll come back to that later. I guess my one piece of advice would be don't wait. Like, just either jot it down or leave yourself a voice memo or do whatever works for you. But if something really stands out for you in those episodes, then action it, go for it, because that's exactly what it's there for, is to try and provide that value. Look into it, and what's stopping you from doing it. So just go for it and enjoy it, and then go back and listen to all the ones that maybe aren't as high a priority for you and see if there's anything there that stands out for you.
Get a different perspective. Chloe, that was brilliant, and thank you for letting me put you on the spot for once.
Uncomfortable. Back to hosting, please. And that brings us to the end of 2024. What a season it's been. I really hope you've enjoyed listening as much as me and the team have enjoyed recording it. And a big thank you to every single one of our guests and listeners for this year. We really, really encourage you to share any topics, any guests, any ideas or things that you'd love to hear about. This podcast is really built to share that valuable information. So if there's something we haven't covered yet that you'd love to hear about, please get in touch. All of our details are in the show notes. We'll be kicking off our 2025 season with the launch of the Bench Press survey. We'll have a very special panel episode to reflect on the full year in agency land and think about predictions for the year ahead. See you then. Thank you for listening to the Beautiful Business Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please remember to subscribe and leave us a review. For more advice and practical tips on what it's really like to build a beautiful business, visit our content hub at wowco.uk/hub or check out the link in the show notes.